My husband appeared alive at his own funeral with my sister, but I stayed silent as everyone gasped until he said, "You were just a phase." She smirked. "We're the real deal." I laughed and handed them a flash drive. "You forgot to delete your secrets." The room went dead silent as the screens lit up. My name is Ray, and for 15 years, I had been married to Alex. We lived in a modest two-story home in Norfolk, Virginia, surrounded by tall trees and the peaceful quiet of suburbia. My life, on the surface, seemed perfectly ordinary, except that it wasn't. Not anymore. I wasn't blind to the changes that had begun creeping into my marriage. They hadn't been sudden, but rather slow, subtle shifts, like the way the sun slips beneath the horizon without you even noticing until it's gone. But once the shift became undeniable, it was too late to pretend I hadn't noticed. Alex had been distant for months, pulling away in ways I couldn't quite understand. There had been the long hours at work, the sudden business trips, the late nights that weren't really about work. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts racing. Is he having an affair? I'd wondered. But I couldn't bring myself to confront him, not yet. I wasn't sure I was ready to hear the truth. At the time, I was working as a legal assistant in a small firm just outside the city. My job was stable but uninspiring, and my life revolved around the mundane tasks of managing paperwork, scheduling appointments, and dealing with clients. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. I had 2 kids, Luke, who was 13, and Chloe, 10, and they kept me busy when I wasn't managing the endless paperwork at work. My days were filled with the kind of ordinary busyness that left little time for anything deeper. I didn't mind it, not really. I had everything I thought I needed. But something about Alex's behavior left a hole in the center of everything. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. I'm overreacting, I thought. He's just tired. He works hard. But the more I thought about it, the harder it became to ignore. The breaking point came on a quiet Friday night. Alex had come home late, as he always did, his tie slightly loosened and his shirt sleeves rolled up. I was sitting in the living room, half watching TV, when he came in and threw his briefcase on the coffee table. He didn't even look at me. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "How was your day?" "Fine," he muttered, brushing past me to grab a drink from the fridge. There was a tension in the air that hadn't been there before. The kind of tension you can't ignore, no matter how hard you try. I wasn't sure why, but I found myself asking a question I had been avoiding for weeks. "Are you seeing someone else?" I could see the instant hesitation in his eyes. He didn't answer right away, and in that pause, everything that had been left unsaid hung in the air like a dark cloud. It felt like the world had stopped turning for a split second, and in that silence I knew. "Ray," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I'm sorry. I don't want to hurt you, but it's over between us." The word struck me like a punch to the gut, knocking the breath from my lungs. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I couldn't even cry. I just stood there, staring at him, unable to process what he'd just said. "Don't," I managed to whisper. "Don't do this." But it was too late. He had already made up his mind. He packed his bags that night. It was so surreal, watching him leave our home, the place we had built together. It felt like a dream, but it wasn't. It was real. He was gone. In the days that followed, I moved through the motions of life like a ghost. I still got up every morning, still took care of the kids, still went to work. But inside, I felt hollow. The world felt different now. Every corner of the house seemed to echo with the absence of Alex. The kitchen, once filled with laughter and the sound of his voice, was quiet. I spent my nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying that conversation over and over in my mind. How could he do this? I thought. How could he just leave me like that? It was a week later when I first saw Lydia. Lydia was my sister, my younger sister by 3 years, and she had always been the more outgoing one, the more adventurous. We had always been close, sharing secrets, laughing over silly things, confiding in one another. So when she called me one afternoon, asking me to come over, I didn't think twice. "Ray, I need you to come to the house." "There's something I need to show you," she said, her voice strained, almost nervous. I didn't know what to expect, but I drove to her place without hesitation, curiosity gnawing at me. When I arrived, she was standing by the front door, her face pale. Something was off. There was an anxiety in her posture that I had never seen before. "Ray, I don't know how to say this," she began, stepping aside to let me in. I followed her through the house, the air thick with something I couldn't quite place. She stopped in the living room and pointed to the couch. And there he was. Alex, sitting there like it was any normal day. For a moment, I thought I was imagining things. But no, it was him, my husband, sitting on the couch in my sister's living room, looking as if he hadn't just walked out on me a week ago. My heart skipped a beat. "Alex?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "What are you doing here?" He looked at me, and for a moment, there was no recognition in his eyes. Then he spoke, his voice cold. "Ray, I didn't think you'd find out like this. But I'm done. I'm with Lydia now." Lydia stood by the door, a smirk playing at the corner of her mouth. I couldn't believe it. My sister, my own sister, was with my husband. I stared at them, feeling like the room was closing in around me. "What is this?" You too." I couldn't finish the sentence. Lydia crossed her arms, her expression smug. "We're the real deal, Ray. You were just a phase." Her words hit me harder than I ever thought possible. A phase? I had been married to Alex for over 15 years, and she was telling me I was just a phase? Something inside me snapped. The anger that had been simmering beneath the surface finally boiled over, but instead of screaming, I felt a strange calmness wash over me. I had known, hadn't I? I had known for a while, even before I confronted him that night. I just hadn't wanted to admit it. I pulled out my phone, my hands steady despite the turmoil swirling inside. I had planned for this. I wasn't going to let them get away with this, not without facing the consequences. "Did you think you could hide everything?" I asked, my voice quiet but strong. I wasn't asking for answers. I wasn't asking for apologies. I was just stating the truth. "You didn't think I'd find out, did you?" Their faces faltered for a moment, and I could see the panic creeping in. With one quick motion, I inserted a flash drive into the laptop on the coffee table. The room fell silent as the screen lit up with files, photos, videos, email exchanges, the evidence of their affair, and much more. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Alex looked at the screen in horror, his face draining of color. Lydia's smirk vanished, replaced by something closer to fear. "Ray, please," Alex started, but his voice cracked. "I didn't mean for it to, I know," I interrupted. "You didn't mean for it to happen. But it did. And now everyone will know." I stood there, watching as their lives unraveled before them. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel angry. I felt free. This was it. The end. The beginning of something new. I stood there, watching them, my heart racing, but strangely calm. It was as if I were floating above the scene, witnessing the destruction of everything I thought I knew, but from a distance. There was no anger left. Just a quiet, unshakable resolve. Alex was still staring at the screen, his eyes wide, his mouth moving as though he were trying to form words, but no sound came out. Lydia, too, had been struck mute. I could see the shame in their faces, but it wasn't the guilt of someone who truly regretted their actions. It was the kind of shame you wear when you realize the consequences are finally catching up to you, the kind of shame that is born from fear, not remorse. "Ray, please," Lydia said, her voice small and hesitant now. "You don't understand. This isn't how I wanted it to happen." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was still trying to justify it, trying to explain away everything that had led up to this moment. "Isn't how you wanted it to happen?" I repeated, my voice steady but cold. "So, what? You were going to wait for me to just disappear quietly? For Alex to break the news and let you two live happily ever after while I just faded into the background?" She opened her mouth as if to speak, but nothing came out. I didn't give her the chance to answer. "I thought you were my sister," I said softly, the words sinking deep into the air between us. "But I guess I was wrong. All this time, I was thinking you were the one person I could rely on. But you're no different from him." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't care. Not anymore. Alex, meanwhile, was starting to gather himself, trying to reassert some control over the situation. His usual air of self-assuredness was crumbling, and in its place was a man who, for the first time, seemed utterly lost. "Ray," he said, his voice breaking slightly, "I never meant for any of this to happen. I didn't want to hurt you. You have to believe that." I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "No, Alex. You didn't mean to hurt me. You just didn't care enough to stop." There was a long pause. The only sound in the room was the faint hum of the laptop. I could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on me. It wasn't the kind of silence you expect after a huge blow-up. It was the kind of silence that followed an irrevocable change, the kind of silence that came with understanding that nothing could ever go back to the way it was. For a long time, no one said anything. We just stood there, me, quietly resolute, Alex, still processing the fallout, and Lydia, trying to figure out how to piece together whatever was left of the sisterhood she had just destroyed. The irony of it hit me like a wave, making my stomach churn. How had I not seen it? How had I been so blind to the way things were slipping away? It wasn't just the affair. It was everything: the lies, the secrecy, the cold distance I had felt between us for months, even before I had any idea about Lydia and Alex. I had allowed myself to ignore it, hoping it would pass, hoping things would get better, hoping that the perfect little family I had imagined would come back to life on its own. But it was never going to come back. That version of us was gone, buried beneath all the lies and betrayals. I looked over at Lydia one more time. Her face was streaked with tears, but there was something behind her eyes that I couldn't ignore. Guilt, yes, but also a strange sense of entitlement. Like she believed she had every right to be here, to take what had once been mine. I shook my head. You really thought you could get away with this, didn't you? I don't know, she stammered. I didn't think it would come to this. I thought I could fix things with you. I didn't mean for you to find out this way. Fix things with me? I asked, incredulity lacing my voice. By sleeping with my husband? By tearing everything apart? I'm sorry, Ray, Alex interjected, his voice desperate now. I never wanted to hurt you. Please, just let me explain. I shook my head slowly. There's nothing to explain, Alex. The truth is already on the screen. I don't need anything from you anymore. I felt a pang in my chest at the finality of my words, but it wasn't regret. It wasn't sorrow. It was just the end of a chapter one had never imagined would close this way. For a while, no one moved. We just stood there in the quiet, the tension thick and suffocating. I wanted to leave. I wanted to turn and walk out the door and never look back. But there was one thing I needed to do before I left, to take back whatever little power I had left in this situation. I turned to Lydia and Alex, my voice low but firm. You both think you've won. But you haven't. You haven't even come close. With that, I turned and walked out of the room, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't wait for them to say anything more. I didn't need to. I had already said everything I needed to say. The drive back to my house felt different, like I was seeing the world through a new lens. The streets seemed brighter, sharper, more vivid, as if I was seeing everything for the first time. It wasn't relief I felt, it was something else. Something more complicated. When I got home, I stood in the kitchen for a moment, just staring at the familiar surroundings. The empty chairs at the kitchen table where Alex and I used to sit together. The photos on the walls of our kids growing up, all the memories that once seemed so safe and permanent. Now they felt like ghosts, reminders of a life that no longer existed. But I wasn't sad. Not yet, anyway. I wasn't angry either. There was no point in being angry anymore. They had made their choices, and now it was my turn to make mine. I went upstairs to my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, my mind spinning. What did I do next? The answer didn't come immediately, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let this break me. Not now. Not after everything. It had taken me far too long to see the truth, but I was seeing it now. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting out a slow breath. I had a lot of thinking to do, and even more healing. But whatever came next, I would face it on my own terms. The truth had been exposed, the lies uncovered. And now it was time for me to move forward. But before I could begin that new chapter, there was one last thing I had to do. Something Alex and Lydia would never see coming. Something I wasn't done with yet. The next few days passed in a haze. I moved through them like a machine, waking up, going to work, making sure the kids had everything they needed, keeping up appearances for the world outside. But inside, I was unraveling. It wasn't just the shock of Alex's betrayal. It was everything that had come before: the quiet, creeping distance between us, the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. The affair, the lies, Lydia's role in it, it was like a wound I couldn't stop picking at. I would find myself standing in the kitchen, staring at the place where Alex's coffee mug used to sit every morning. The empty space felt like a physical ache. Every corner of the house felt foreign now, haunted by memories of a life I thought I had. But it wasn't just the absence of Alex that stung. It was the betrayal by Lydia, my own sister. I had known her my entire life. We had shared everything: our secrets, our childhood, our dreams. Or so I thought. What was it about me that made her think she could get away with this? That I wouldn't find out? The answer, of course, was simple. She underestimated me. And maybe she underestimated how far I would go when pushed to the edge. It was late Saturday afternoon when I decided to pay Alex and Lydia a visit again. I didn't know what I was going to say or do, I just knew I couldn't leave things as they were. I needed closure, and I wasn't going to get it by sitting idly at home, brooding over what had already happened. The drive to Lydia's house was quieter than I expected. I wasn't nervous, but there was a strange calmness in me that felt almost too calm, as if everything had already fallen apart and there was nothing left to lose. I thought about the flash drive I'd handed them, the way it had lit up the room with all their secrets, their private conversations. It had been satisfying, yes, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. When I pulled up outside Lydia's house, I took a moment to look at it. It wasn't anything special, a two-story house in a cul-de-sac, the kind of place you could imagine anyone living in. The lawn was neatly trimmed, and the car parked in the driveway looked like a typical family car. But inside that house, everything had changed. The house wasn't just a house anymore. It was the place where my sister had crossed the line, where she had destroyed everything we'd ever shared. I rang the doorbell and waited, my pulse steady. The door opened slowly, and Lydia stood there, her face tired, eyes still red from the crying I knew she had been doing since the confrontation. "Ray," she said, her voice soft, almost pleading. "I'm not here to talk about apologies," I said, cutting her off before she could continue. "I need you to understand something, Lydia. Everything that's happened, it's not just between you and Alex. This is between me and you. And I need you to hear me out." She nodded slowly, stepping aside to let me in. We didn't speak as I walked past her into the living room. I could feel the weight of her gaze on my back, but I didn't turn to face her. I wasn't here to console her. I wasn't here to offer forgiveness. I was here for one reason, to make it clear that this wasn't the end of the story. I took a deep breath, then turned to her. "What you did, Lydia, it wasn't just about Alex. It was about me. About us. You didn't just betray your sister. You betrayed our whole family. And the worst part is that you thought you could get away with it." Lydia opened her mouth, but no words came out. She didn't seem to know what to say. I wasn't sure I cared. "Do you even realize how much I trusted you?" I continued, my voice growing firmer, more resolute. "I was there for you through everything. I supported you when you broke up with your ex. I helped you through your tough times, through your job struggles, through all of it. And this is how you repay me." She lowered her head, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't sorry at all. "I don't need you to apologize," I said, my words cutting through the thick silence. "I don't need anything from you. What I need is for you to realize that this isn't over. Not for me. And not for you." Lydia didn't say anything in response. She just stared at the floor, her eyes avoiding mine. I could see the guilt there, but it wasn't the kind of guilt that came from remorse. It was the kind of guilt that came from being caught. "I'm going to make sure people know the truth," I said quietly. "What you and Alex did, the lies, the manipulation, the secret life you've been living, it's going to come out. It's going to come out, and everyone's going to know exactly who you really are. You've already started this war, but trust me, I'm not backing down." For a long moment, Lydia said nothing. The tension between us was thick enough to cut with a knife. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "What do you want from me, Ray? What is it that you want?" I took another deep breath. This time, it wasn't anger that filled my chest, but something else, something that felt like power, like I was finally in control of my own narrative. "I want you to understand that I won't let this define me," I said, my voice low but steady. "I won't let you and Alex tear apart my life. You think you've won, but you haven't. You've just woken up a side of me you didn't want to see. A side that's going to make sure you pay for what you've done." I turned and walked toward the door, every step lighter than the last. The weight that had been hanging over me for so long was slowly beginning to lift. The first step had been confronting them, revealing their betrayal. The second step, though, was the one I had been waiting for, the one where I could take control of the situation and make them face the consequences. As I stepped outside, I felt a strange calm settle over me. It wasn't relief. Not exactly. But it was the beginning of something new. Something that didn't involve Alex. Something that didn't involve Lydia. Something that was all mine. When I got back to my car, I sat there for a moment, my hands resting on the steering wheel. I wasn't sure what the future held. I wasn't sure where this journey would take me. But I was done being a victim. I wasn't going to sit back and watch my life fall apart without fighting for it. I had a long road ahead. But one thing was clear, I wasn't walking it alone. The last thing I did before pulling out of the driveway was check my phone. There was a message from my lawyer. The first step in securing my future and the future of my kids was already in motion. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was on the right path. The next few weeks went by in a blur of meetings, phone calls, and quiet, determined action. I knew that this battle wasn't going to be over quickly, but I didn't care. I was ready. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was making sure the life Alex and Lydia had built off lies and deception crumbled around them. I kept a low profile, focusing on my work and the kids. They didn't know everything, of course. There were some things they didn't need to hear. They knew their father wasn't around anymore, and they knew he wasn't coming back anytime soon. The rest would come later, when they were ready. But the most important thing was that they could see me. Really see me for the first time in a long time. I wasn't broken. I wasn't defeated. I was their mother, and I would always protect them. The first step was getting my lawyer to initiate the divorce proceedings. It wasn't about the money or the assets. Those were secondary. What mattered was putting everything on paper, making it clear to everyone involved that Alex had made his choice, and that the fallout would be his to bear. It wasn't going to be a quiet separation. It wasn't going to be the amicable divorce that some people might expect. No, I was going to make sure everyone knew the truth. The whole truth. Through the divorce process, I also made sure to file a few more strategic legal documents. Ones that would ensure that the world would know just how Alex had used his position, his charm, and his deceit to manipulate people. I wasn't just protecting myself, I was protecting anyone who might be vulnerable to him in the future. I didn't want his lies to affect anyone else the way they had affected me. I wanted people to see him for who he truly was. As for Lydia, I kept my distance. I knew that what hurt her the most wasn't the divorce or the loss of her relationship with Alex. It was the complete collapse of her image. She thought she could be the victim in all of this, thought she could sit in a corner and act like the whole affair had just been some sort of misunderstanding. But she had underestimated me, underestimated how far I was willing to go to expose the truth. The moment came when I had everything I needed. The flash drive, the one I'd handed them at that moment of confrontation, had done its job. But there was one more piece I had to make sure was in place. One final blow that would ensure they would never forget what they had done. I went to a local news outlet. I didn't need to make a grand announcement, but I did need the world to see the truth. The affair, the manipulation, the lies, they would all come out, not just in a court of law, but in a way that would expose Alex and Lydia for who they truly were. The public didn't need to know every detail of my life, but they deserved to know about the betrayal that had rocked my world. I walked into the office of the reporter I had been in contact with, a woman named Rachel. She had been polite but firm with me, assuring me that she would handle everything professionally, without sensationalizing the details. "We'll make sure the story gets out," Rachel said as she flipped through the documents I handed her. "This kind of betrayal deserves to be exposed. It's not just about the affair, it's about the way they've manipulated people's lives." I nodded, my stomach tight. I had already made peace with the fact that once this was out in the open, there was no going back. But it wasn't about revenge, it was about justice. It was about standing up for myself and saying, "This is who I am, and this is what you took from me." The article ran 2 days later. The headline, simple and straightforward, made sure that everything was crystal clear. Local businessman exposed for affair with sister-in-law and other deceptive practices. The details were brutal for Alex and Lydia. The article outlined the timeline of the affair, referenced my legal documents, and even brought in some interviews with people who had witnessed Alex's behavior firsthand, people who were too afraid to speak up before, but now had the courage because they knew the truth was out. And then there was the final kicker, Lydia. The article didn't just talk about her role in the affair, it talked about her own manipulations. Her lies. Her betrayal. Her years of playing the perfect sister while stabbing me in the back. The public reaction was swift. I don't think either of them anticipated it would be so intense. Alex's business suffered immediately. Clients he had worked with for years pulled out. His colleagues stopped returning his calls. There were rumors that some of the bigger players in the industry were beginning to question his credibility. Lydia's reputation, meanwhile, took a different hit. She'd always prided herself on being seen as the good, caring sister, the one who never caused trouble, the one who could do no wrong. That image evaporated overnight, replaced by the cold reality of what she had done. Alex and Lydia didn't see me again for a long time after that. I don't know where they went or what they did. I didn't care to follow it. What mattered was that, by the time they resurfaced, I was long gone from their lives. I was still standing. I had built a new life for myself, one that was stronger and more authentic than anything they could have ever imagined. The kids and I moved into a new place, a house we all loved. I made sure it felt like home, filled with warmth and laughter. The past was the past, but I didn't want it to control me anymore. I didn't want the shadow of their betrayal to hang over me. I spent time with the kids, helping them adjust to the changes in our family, but more than that, I focused on rebuilding my own life. I joined a support group, met with friends I hadn't seen in years, and even started volunteering at a local community center. I wanted to remind myself that life could still be beautiful, even after everything I had been through. One afternoon, I was sitting in the kitchen, sipping a cup of coffee when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I hesitated before getting up to answer it. When I opened the door, I wasn't surprised to find a delivery man standing there, holding an envelope. "This is for you, ma'am," he said, handing it over. I took it, and as I read the contents, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction settle over me. The letter was from Alex's lawyer. They were willing to settle the divorce quietly. The terms were more than fair, far better than I had anticipated. Alex had seen the writing on the wall. He knew he'd lost. I set the letter down on the kitchen counter and smiled. I hadn't needed to fight dirty. I hadn't needed to beg. I'd simply let them destroy themselves with their own actions. They had done the work for me. As I looked out the window at the sun beginning to set, I knew that while the journey hadn't been easy, it had been worth it. The truth had come to light, and it had exposed everything for what it really was. In the end, Alex and Lydia hadn't won anything. They had lost everything. And I had won my peace.